welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Carol Newcomb-Aludo. I'm the I'm the chair of CMC's board. Somebody put vice chair. Have I been demoted? Okay. Anyway, it's great to see everyone here today, and we have a great crowd, over 320, I believe, which really speaks to the importance of this topic. So thank you all for being here. Today, our forum, Unexpected Faceless of Homelessness, Teens on the Street, is supported by Huckleberry House, Community Shelter Board, and the Star House, each of whom are represented here today by many guests and associates. Won't you please help me thank them? It's tough to be a kid today. It's a frantically changing world. Pressures of school, pressures from peers, pressures from family, or overall anxiety associated with growing up can be overwhelming. I have 14 grandchildren. I am truly blessed. The youngest is 5 and the oldest is 16. They face a world that is scary to me, but they have energy, they have hope, and they have a future that hopefully we will help make for them. It becomes very hard for these normal challenges to also, for children also to be faced with basic survival needs like food, shelter, clothing. And how do they get through the next day or this day if they don't have these things or if they are lacking one of them? Let alone, how can they look to the future? Far too many young adults in our community, the struggle to meet their basic needs is very, very real. To learn what is going on in our community, let's turn to our experts. Please welcome the CEO of Star House, Ann Bischoff, the Associate Director of the Community Shelter Board, Tom Albanese, the Executive Director of Huckleberry House, Betty Westerfeld, and of course, our host, VP of Community Research and Grants Management at the Columbus Foundation, Dan Sharp. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Carol. One of the things that I love about CMC is the timely nature of these conversations. And today is absolutely timely, but not for the reasons that you think it might be. It's not because yesterday was Giving Tuesday, or that we're in the midst of the holiday season when the weather gets colder, but our hearts get warmer and turn to those who are less fortunate. Today, it's a timely conversation because it's an urgent need for so many on a daily basis in our community. Estimates have 2,000 youth living homeless in our community. And as Carol said, we are lucky to be joined by experts today, and I really would encourage you to look in the program listing today to learn more about their organizations and their careers, which they have dedicated to this cause. So for a snapshot on the issue, we are talking about youth in Columbus, not those living half a globe away on 25 cents a day, right here in our community. So can you personify this for us? Who are we talking about, and who is it that your organizations are serving?
Absolutely. So, Greater Columbus is 2 million strong, and we're growing. We're now the 14th largest city in the nation, right? That's big time. And as Columbus continues to grow, you can expect youth homelessness, as you pointed out, to keep up in step. And that's why it's so important that we're here today to talk about this topic. 10 years ago, back in 2006, the estimate of youth ages 14 to 24 right here in Central Ohio who were living on the streets, disconnected from family, no permanent place to call home, the estimate was 1,200, right? Fast forward to last year, in Star House alone, we specialize in serving street living youth. We served nearly 1,000 young people, individuals, within 1 year. So we decided to turn to Dr. Natasha Sleznick. She's our founder, and she's a nationally recognized expert on street living youth. We decided, since we served nearly 1,000 youth last year and we knew we weren't reaching all of them, to increase the estimate from 1,200 to 2,000, as Dan pointed out. And that's enough kids. I heard that there are 325 of us here today, so that's enough to fill this room 5 times. There are a lot of kids, and we know that they arrive in this situation due to no fault of their own. These kids are runaways. They're running away from an abusive situation. I've heard a story from one of our kids that he ran away from an abusive situation. When he came to us, he told us he'd been sleeping on an inflatable pool raft behind a dumpster at Easton, just so that he could get to work on time at one of the clothing stores at Easton. And looking at him, you would never know, looking at him, that he was experiencing homelessness. So these are the young people we're serving. A lot of us in this room, I would imagine, we live in a suburban bubble. I do. I live in Westerville, and we can travel from these suburban bubbles to downtown and never really see the depths of poverty that exist right here in our very own backyard. You might see the guy on the side of the road holding the proverbial cardboard sign that says, "Help me, I need some money." But you can discount that guy because you've heard the urban legend that he's pulling in $100,000. I don't know if I'm the only one who's heard that. Pulling in $100,000 begging for money on the side of the road. But when you walk into Star House, you walk into Huck House, and you see these kids and you hear their stories, you hear that they're going to college, they're enrolled in college, they're working 2 jobs. They simply just don't have the pieces that they need to maintain stability. You can't deny that this is a crisis. It's a crisis, but I'm hopeful because I know Columbus can get this right. We can prevent chronic homelessness for these youth.
Well, I think Ann did a good job of really laying out the breadth of the problem and the numbers, and I know the Shelter Board has been collecting data. I think I want to maybe just agree with her and then also kind of talk about the fact that these are children or people that we know. We keep acting like they're folks that just kind of sprung out of the air on their 18th birthday. But in fact, we know these children. We knew them in our recreation programs. We knew them in our residential treatment programs. We knew them in foster care. We knew them in our after-school programs. So I think that one of the things that I really want us as a community, I mean, you've got 3 organizations up here who do respond and do some amazing work, but we're past that. We need to start talking as a community about how we know these children before their 18th birthday, and we're surprised by their plight the day after their 18th birthday. So that's kind of where my head is at. I mean, like Ann, the stories of these kids, you would be surprised because everybody's got this image of, kids who are, probably on the verge of crime or committing crime and all of that. Not true. These are kids who have fallen through a huge crack that we created, by the way, and that they're lost. They're just not connected. And our connecting them is going to be a big part of the solution.
I don't know what more to add to that, except I'll just say that, I think everyone would expect that being a representative of the Shelter Board, I would talk about numbers, but frankly, I don't care about numbers. I would argue that one homeless kid or youth on the street is one too many.
So let's go deeper then. The philosophical question might be, how did we get here? And that's a big question, but we'll keep it framed to this conversation because I heard Becky and Ann both allude to some things that might be systemic or might be episodic, but how did we get to this point?
Right. Becky pointed out that these kids are aging out of foster care, and that's certainly part of the story. Here's what we know about street living youth, what we've learned at Star House. Half of these kids were in foster care. So that tells us that they were placed outside of the home due to abuse and neglect, and they don't have mommy and daddy there to support them during these crucial transition years. Nobody to cover those emergency needs, no basement to fall back on, right? We also know that 41% of these young people have attempted suicide at least once. It's the #1 killer of this population, for a population that is, by the way, 12 times more likely to die, period, than their peers who are not homeless. So there's a significant lack of hope for the future among these young people who are faced with barrier after barrier after barrier. We also know that a third have experienced intimate partner abuse, which they've run away from. They've escaped their abuser. This also denotes human trafficking. This is a population that is highly susceptible to exploitation because nobody's looking for them, and their pimp knows it. A quarter of these youth identify LGBTQ, and they tell us they've been ostracized from their family and their community for that reason. And what this all boils down to is trust. These are young people who've been let down time and time again by the adults who were supposed to be there to love and support them, and they're hurting. And June Gutterman is here with Jewish Family Services. She shared a statistic with me about a month ago that chills me to the bone. She said that they surveyed Holocaust survivors and asked them to place themselves on this 10-point scale of trauma, the ACEs scale. A lot of you in this room know what that is. And the indicators on this scale don't include things like, I dropped my iPhone and the screen cracked, as traumatic as that is. They're very real indicators of trauma, like rape, abuse, assault, neglect, loss of a family member. And you might expect a Holocaust survivor to score an 8 on this 10-point scale. But they also surveyed youth who'd experienced foster care, kids who were taken out of their home due to abuse, neglect, and other reasons. And these young people who represent youth at Huck House and at Star House scored the same exact score as a Holocaust survivor. So not only are these young people disconnected from a place to call home during these crucial transition years, but they're harboring deep levels of pain that's also a barrier to their success, to them finding permanent housing. They're hurting, they're facing barriers, and they need us, and I'm hopeful that we can get this right in Columbus.
Well, I agree with Ann, and I think the only thing that I would add is, I mean, many of you know that I'm a big fan of universal screening on this topic. Those of us in the youth-serving community, of which I see some of you in the audience, I feel like we're not asking questions when we should. We're not asking, where did you sleep last night and where are you going to sleep tomorrow night? Even though these young people are in our programs, or they're in our tutoring programs, or they're, in our rec centers. So, and I understand the difficulties with universal screening, but I really resist the idea that we need to wait until it's a shelter board problem. And I think the youth-serving community really needs to start grappling with the fact that we are letting these kids kind of flow along when we could have asked a question. But I will also say, we better not ask the question unless we have something to say when they tell us. And that belongs to us. Because there's no amount of shelters, no amount of Huck houses or Star houses that is going to solve this if we don't kind of grapple with this. But I feel very strongly that, especially the high school, I mean, we got lots of stuff where we focus on little kids, as we should. But once they hit high school, we're done? No. We have got to really mobilize ourselves around the fact that we as a community raise children, not just individual families.
I think that's right. And I would just add that I think, early intervention efforts are critical. And, they begin with our schools, they begin with our child welfare system, they begin with our families and our communities and other points of contact where we can know what's happening with a youth or child and intervene. I think the challenge is doing that in a consistent way, in a way that, as Becky said, leads to a solution, some form of intervention. And I'll just say that not necessarily specific to youth, but there's a lot of work bubbling around the community around better ways to identify families, individuals, youth included, who are housing unstable, who are at risk, perhaps imminent risk of literal homelessness, and who need some solution besides going to the shelter or spending the night in their car or weeks in their car. And this is something that I think we all have an accountability to see through. How did we get here? I think we got here because there's been a long slide of erosion of our social fabric, beginning with families who are torn apart because of poverty, deep poverty, intergenerational poverty, that really puts pressure on families all along while they struggle to afford housing. I think most of us now know, due to the good work of the Portable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio and others, that we are not on the right trend line when it comes to meeting the housing needs of folks in our community. You know, for every one affordable unit, there's 4 people in poverty who need that unit. So we have a great disparity in our community just for basic needs like affordable housing, that ultimately it's youth and children who pay the penalty for that.
So Tom, I want to build on that quickly. A lot is going very well in Columbus, and we have much to be proud of. And somehow we have a way of landing on all sorts of lists, top lists this. Sometimes it's for dubious distinctions. Sometimes, more often than not, it's prideful distinctions. So building on that, Tom, how are we leading or lagging nationally when it comes to youth homelessness?
It's kind of hard to say, frankly. Part of that is because there's no national standard for even enumerating how many youth are homeless or experiencing some form of housing instability. It's a very difficult thing to get your hands around, partly because youth themselves don't want to be identified and stigmatized as homeless. You know, who among us would want that? So I think that's part of the challenge. I'll just say in my work, prior to coming to the Shelter Board earlier this year and working with different communities, I think there is a growing national movement to effectively end homelessness among youth and children and others. It's hard to say where we're at relative to other communities and sort of accomplishing that end. I would say most communities are in the very formative stages of that work. The good news is for us is that we are, I think, my experience in Columbus and in the many years I've worked here is that we are a very collaborative community. People are not really sort of too hung up on their own organizational boundaries and interests such that they can't collaborate well with others. And I think that's a really strong quality of Columbus and Franklin County. The fact that Huck House, Star House, the Shelter Board, the Housing Authority, many other partners worked together over the last 100 days as part of our community effort to move the needle on ending youth homelessness as part of a national challenge, I think speaks volumes about the collaborative spirit in our community. So I'd like to think that we're ahead of the curve. I think we have some amazing partners in Huck House and Star House, Kaleidoscope, Center for Healthy Families, and others who are at the table, and we are all actively working together.
If I could, I do think that we're a community that collaborates well and that there's some really amazing and creative options. However, I will also say we are a little bit like collectively all these different systems. So our side of the equation, which are the youth services providers, the adult providers in both housing and homelessness and mental health and all of that. We're a little bit like kids who have a handful of candy and we can't get our hand out of the candy jar. We have to really examine not only how we collaborate, but how we fundamentally change systems that create the opportunity for a 20-year-old to be living on a blow-up mattress behind a dumpster. I mean, we have some things that we have to change. And that was really illuminated during the 100-day challenge. And I think that part of our challenge now, we've kind of, we've done the let's all get together and figure this out. And speaking for Tom and I as two people that were in the room, there are some really difficult conversations about policies, procedures, definitions, all that kind of stuff. And while that can feel very over there, it actually affects who gets what. So we've already had the easy conversations. Now it's time for us to really dig in and articulate what we as Franklin County have to say about how our children are going to fare under these circumstances. And that's not going to be easy. That means that some people are going to have to give up, including people like Huck House. There's some things that we are going to have to change, and we're actually beginning that process as a result of the 100-Day Challenge, as we start to understand some of our practices need to be modified. But I feel like there's a healthy dose of that needs to go around, and that's a whole lot harder than just coming up with a project idea and saying, oh, we're going to work together with another group.
So it's been mentioned 3 times, the 100-Day Challenge. Could we do a high-level, just elevator pitch what it is, not necessarily the process, but just so we walk away having a brief understanding of 100-Day Challenge?
You mean my former part-time job? Yeah.
Sure.
High level.
So the 100-Day Challenge is a national effort that Rapid Results Institute, federal agencies have sponsored. We, Columbus, sought to be part of the 100-Day Challenge. Really, Kim Stans and others with the city and our partners made the effort to be part of the 100-Day Challenge. It's a national effort to really speed up and scale up solutions to ending youth homelessness in a very short amount of time, 100 days. And the idea is to create urgency, energy, and momentum. The good news for us is we were one of 5 communities who participated in the 100-Day Challenge, which just concluded on November 8th. And while we didn't meet our really aggressive goals that we had set for ourselves, we made a lot of progress, as Becky shared. We had folks around the table who hadn't been at the same table before. We've identified now really systematic changes that are necessary in order to move our community forward so we can effectively end homelessness for youth every day. And that's what we're attempting to do. And the way we do that is by first knowing youth and knowing them by name, no matter where they appear. So whether they're sleeping on an air mattress behind Easton or they're showing up in one of our adult shelters as a young person freaked out of their mind about being in shelter, or a young mom with kids, which, by the way, about 1/5 of the families who use shelter in our community are headed by a single mother who's between 18 and 24. So it's not an insignificant number of young adults, young families who are coming into shelter even. And so knowing every youth, providing shelter when need be, when there's no other alternative, and shelter that's safe and accommodating, welcoming, and attenuated to the needs of youth is also critical. And then, of course, providing an effective housing solution. And this is where, we like to say that the emergency shelters in our community are much like an emergency room. We're not the healthcare system. Emergency rooms triage, they deal with acute medical needs, get people stabilized, and then discharged. Well, much like an emergency room, as people need shelter, we are working to provide that, but then also make sure they're connected to safe, appropriate, stable housing as quickly as possible. And that's the real most important component of that, particularly for youth who don't necessarily fit with all the different housing options that we've worked to create for older adults. Shared living, other types of housing arrangements might be more suitable. Think about your own experience, or I think about my 20 and 21-year-old kids who, started off in college in a dorm with a resident advisor, some degree of supervision and support readily available. How many of us benefited from similar situations, whether you were in college or technical school or just living with friends starting your adult life? And this is what our kids need.
And I think one of the things that we're learning as a community, and as we start blurring that line between the two groups, the kid group and the adult group, it is true that the developmental stage itself is both a challenge to overcome, if you will, but it's also an opportunity that is unique to this age group. So there are developmental tasks and almost the biology, if you will, that if we were just a little smarter, we could use that as a resource to compel kids faster out of kind of the issues and into self-sufficiency. As Tom was talking about, we have a world-class transitional living program right down the street, and it's called the Ohio State University. They invite 40 or 50, I don't even know how many, transition-age youth a year into our community. And I'm thinking they do a pretty good job of housing them. I know they've got their problems, but but they understand something. So if you look at, and is there anybody from OSU here? I don't mean to talk, yeah, I know, too late. But if you go to Ohio State University, your experience as a freshman is really different than your experience as a senior in every aspect, all the way from the academic experience to the living experience. So they understand and can teach us a lot about how to put this together in a way that's logical and uses the biological mandate of late adolescence to our advantage, and not just see it as something we have to manage.
Sure, yeah. So, we did not meet the benchmarks of the 100-day challenge, but I see it as a positive because now we have a better idea of what the issue is. And I'm hopeful because I know what our city is capable of. When we're faced with problems, we don't just sit idly by, we take action. Look at the opiate epidemic, look at infant mortality. We can get this right. The Committee to Address Youth Homelessness is beginning to identify where the gaps are, and we're going to, over the next several months, begin to identify what some real solutions are. And it's larger than either of our two organizations here. This is something that's going to take all of us, and I think we're up for the challenge.
We'll be moving to audience questions momentarily, so please align yourself to the microphone, and we will get to those briefly. But Ann, you brought up a good point. The opiate epidemic that's plaguing our community, it's not the first time that a drug epidemic has plagued our community. Human trafficking has arguably been around since the beginning of civilization, and we're finally addressing it and responding to some degree. So the approach would beg new solutions. So I want to give you permission to dream, have ideas, to share with us today, but also to think and discuss what isn't on the table that should be to get our community to a finish line.
This is a population that's highly transient and traumatized, and that's a formula that sets them up for failure in terms of seeking employment, staying in school. So one idea that we have at Star House is a trauma-informed workforce development program. It's a 6-month program. Our youth are couch surfing. They might be living on the north side one night, on the south side the next night. So expecting them to get to the same place every day becomes it's impossible. So we want to meet them where they are, helping them overcome their trauma in partnership with Jewish Family Services. They're going to be working with our youth to identify the trauma in their own lives, to recognize that, and to begin to overcome it, especially within the context of the workplace. And then we're inviting employer partners to provide assembly-type jobs where youth would be paid per unit, same day within our facility. They're coming to us. Let's give them the opportunity to get job experience on site. One of the employers will be Star House. We're starting a social enterprise. It's a floral business where youth will be paid to put bouquets together inside of tall coffee mug vases that will be branded with Star House information and placed on the tabletops of 2 Staff's locations to start, Mojo's downtown, and then Franklinton Staffs. So it's branding awareness for the organization to cultivate volunteers and so forth, but it's jobs for our kids in real time, giving them that experience that they need. And then at the end of the program, they would have the opportunity to be employed by not just Star House's floral business, but many other employer partners, and their resume could read, employed by XYZ. At the end of the 6 months, they're more stabilized and will be prepared to go out and get a livable wage job. So this is just one idea of a potential solution for meeting youth where they are and helping them get a jump start towards success.
As you probably have already figured out, I'm most interested in how we blur that bright yellow line of the 18th birthday. And we're going to do that by allowing kids that we're already working with in the youth serving part of our world to continue through and not have to stop because they turned 18. So that to me is a big part of it. And you know, I've really come to appreciate, especially with the 100-Day Challenge, really having many conversations with Tom. But the adult provider world and the shelter board should be really the tail, that we should have worked so hard before that they've got the occasional kid that they call us up and say, well, we got this one kid, and what do we do with that one kid? So to me, I feel the focus really needs to be on, if you're receiving mental health services because you qualify as a child, and then after your 18th birthday, you have to be more ill to get the same services, there's something wrong with that. There's just fundamentally something wrong with that. I think the other part to this is, as we move through that, we have to use an adolescent development lens when we're putting all this stuff together. We have nationally recognized experts in adolescent development, both at the Ohio State University. That's my second reference to them. I didn't go there, by the way. And down at Children's Hospital, we have people in our backyard that are nationally recognized on the topic of adolescent development, and we ignore that expertise when we build programs, when we build policies, when we build curriculums. I mean, let's stop doing that too. Let's start using the resources we have and apply that lens. And I see a bunch of funders in here. I say, and I ask you for money, so I'm going to include myself in this mix. Don't give out money for this population if it doesn't include that lens. Just don't do it. You know, if you want to work with transition age youth, whether they're homeless or anything else, if you aren't using the adolescent development lens in your program development, you don't get the money. Harsh, I know. But I didn't mean us, of course. Yeah.
Tom, you want to
If
add
I
your
had to dream
dreams?
big, just simply, I would say that every youth had a safe, stable place to call home when they needed that safe, stable place, that the community, and I mean us collectively, had the capacity to offer that, and that youth never spend one night on the street, just as we've made that commitment to families with children. That's my dream.
It is CMC's tradition to take audience questions, so please state your name and state your question, and please refrain from long-winded editorial comments when stating your question. Sir.
My name is John McKnight. So to use the one youth as an example that you mentioned that was living on an air mattress at Easton, had 2 jobs, I can imagine there are individuals like that that are perfectly mentally healthy and capable. It's a matter of affordable housing, transportation, jobs all coming together. How much of the problem that we're addressing is that sort of thing, you know, logistics and economics versus dealing with mental health issues? I'm sure that both exist, but I tend to think it might be predominantly based around mental health issues, but maybe I'm wrong. Thank you.
Well, I can only speak for the Huck House experience. You know, it would almost be impossible to pull those 2 parts away from each other. And in fact, I would resist even trying to do that, because if you are somebody who is struggling with low wages and all of that, and you also are struggling with a history of trauma, or you come from families that were extremely poor themselves, the day that you wake up and you just can't get to work and you don't call in is the day you just lost that low-paying job. And so they're so intertwined that it would be difficult for us, anyway, the Huckleberry folks, to pull those apart.
Hi, I'm Jaren Terry Communications. I have an observation and a question. So near and dear to my heart as a board member of PFLAG Columbus are the LGBTQ youth. And Ann mentioned the statistic that a quarter of the youth you see are LGBTQ. And Tom mentioned the importance of early intervention. So as we know from various studies, including those done by PFLAG and GLAD, many LGBT youth become homeless the day they come out. And so we need to do some early intervention for parents to change their attitudes and their understanding. And my hope through PFLAG and in collaboration with other organizations is that we can do that through, getting the word out through churches, schools, in the community that these kids are who they are. They just need to be accepted. And so my question that's related to that is, how do you handle youth who are transgender or gender non-conforming in terms of the boys' side and the girls' side? How do you house them?
Within shelter, I have to say that we have a very small number of trans folks who are identifying as trans coming into shelter. We can do a better job. I don't want to gloss over that. I think we could do a better job. The fact of the matter is, I think we hear enough anecdotal sort of evidence to suggest that we're not only can we do a better job, we must do a better job, because a lot of folks who are trans are not coming into shelter for concerns about their safety, for other concerns about just dealing with the pressure of being in an environment like that. We as a community have to do a much better job.
My name is Sarah Edwards. Something that I'm curious about is the effect that a transient lifestyle has on homeless and other youth that might be in the foster care system, particularly when they change school systems or districts, and how much education exactly is lost in that process every time it occurs.
Right, and we work with youth who are street living, and they're in survival mode. So when you're in survival mode, education is not as much of a priority. So youth come to us, typically they've dropped out or they've been in hiding, and we meet them where they are, and we say, okay, how many high school credits do you have right now? If they have 3 to go, we connect them with a dropout recovery high school where they're able to close those out. If they haven't been in school since 9th grade, then we encourage them to go the GED route. This is one more area, education, where we truly need to meet these young people where they are, come up with creative solutions that help them gain the foundation of stability while they're earning these skills as well.
And I'm just going to add to that. One of the things I think we have to still hang on to is the brain is doing something while all that's going on. It's either developing or it's not developing. And I think a lot of what we do and a lot of what we're talking to the adult providers about is how do you repair the lack of that developmental task not being achieved, awkwardly put. But so there are a lot of things that we can do to kind of help. For instance, the decision-making process is being refined at that age. Now, if you're moving around a lot and you're just kind of in survival mode, a lot of the developmental tasks aren't being achieved. And what a lot of the work that we do, certainly at Huck House, and I think that the adult providers are looking at, is how do we then repair the fact that those developmental tasks weren't achieved? And what do we need to do to make sure that that brain maturation catches up? But moving around a lot is a trauma. It's like a lot of other things.
Good afternoon, Barbara Poppy. 2 weeks ago, there was a national study released by the University of Chicago, which found that 1 in 10 young people aged 18 to 24 experience homelessness. I want to let that sit with you, 1 in 10. So the question I have for you as the panel is that clearly, if 1 in 10 young people in central Ohio experience homelessness and they're going to college, they're going to Columbus State, they're on the streets, they're working, they're trying, all those other things are going on. I'm not, as much as I think you guys are 3 fantastic organizations, I'm not seeing that the nonprofit sector can solve a problem that's 1 in 10. So the question for you is who do we need on our team to solve this that either isn't playing or isn't playing as well as we need them to, or at the leadership level? Because if we really want to move 1 in 10 youth not being homeless, it's much bigger than the wonderful work that the 3 of you can do.
Oh, Barbara, you had to. Who let her in? That's all I want to know. I mean, you are actually asking the tough question that we struggled with in the 100-Day Challenge. I know the work that the Columbus Foundation is in the middle of doing right now about how you put it all together. Because, as you've pointed out, it's this complex mix of not just services provided, but it's also about how we educate kids, how we employ people, and how we support or don't support families. But I do think that I would like to see policymakers and the leadership of Franklin County get into the game a whole lot more than they are, because that's where it all comes together. And so, to me, we got a lot of special project stuff going on, and that's great, but I worry a little bit, even though I'm in the middle of the special projects, I worry that we're going to special project this to death, that we're not going to approach it. All you, the guys that are clapping, I want your card after this. We're going to form a committee. No, just kidding, we're not. But what I mean by that is that we have to integrate fundamental change in our systemic approach to a number of things, like education, like poverty, and we have to be willing to do that. So let's not special project this to death, and don't ask any more hard questions.
But if I can just add, I think it begins today, right? There's 320-some people in the room. How many organizations are represented here? The reality is, I agree with Becky, we need to elevate this issue. We need to dramatically lower the tolerance that we currently have for youth or anybody experiencing homelessness, and I would argue housing instability and the trauma and stress that goes with that, because it is stressful. And in fact, particularly for young people, experiencing the stress of not having your basic needs met has lifelong impacts that impact every one of us. So it is a community problem to solve. And I think, Barb, you asked the right question, because it's not about the emergency room solving the problem. It's not about special projects to death solving the problem. Ultimately, we need to start a community conversation and elevate this so we are all concerned, and that none of us have tolerance for anyone being homeless or housing unstable.
Hi, my name is Jordan Horston, and I go to Columbus Afrocentric Early College High School. My question for you is, what can us as high school students do to actually help the teenage homeless situation? Like, is there anything that we can do specifically?
Be our eyes and ears. If you see someone or you hear a story of a young person who's disconnected from family, sleeping, couch surfing, living in one place one night, the next another place the next night, tell them about Star House. Tell them about Huck House.
I would go a little bit farther than that and say, call us. We'd like you to come down and volunteer. I think that there's a lot of room for youth to youth, and start a club in your school that's about some prevention messages. We'll help you do that. I think that you, like I was just telling everybody else to get into the game. I'd like you guys to get in the game too. And we can help you figure that out. But I think you're talking to the other yous in your world is an important step forward.
Good afternoon. My name is Savannah, and I attend Columbus African Early College, and I was going to ask a question based on what she said, but you had already answered it. So, kind of thank you in advance, but I'm sorry in advance if I mispronounce your name. But we would like to have Miss, I'm not even going to try it. Bischoff, thank you. Come to Afrocentric and talk to Nubian Pearls about it because we're very interested and we work heavily with it.
Absolutely.
At our
Can
school.
I say something?
Thank
A
you.
Nubian Pearl is a.
Oh, go ahead.
Can I? Yeah, okay. A Nubian Pearl is like a girls group at our school. It means phenomenal, educated, ambitious, real lady, responsible lady. And it's a group of. It's like a group of like our leaders, girls, our girls leaders in the school, and like we just get together and we have like women come speak to us about like, you know, just empowerful things, you know. So. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
My name is Christina, and my question is, are there opportunities to provide mentorship to transition-age youth after they leave your program?
Mentoring is very important. It's been proven more successful than therapy for kids who've experienced trauma. We know this, and that's something, in fact, I just got an email from one of our staff members today. We're going to be talking about mentoring, but mentoring that's specific for this population, a one-to-one match, might not be the best idea for someone who's experienced trauma in the way that our kids have, but maybe a table of people who are there to love and support them and take them forward. Absolutely, it's important.
Okay. Thank you very much, panel. Thank you. As you can see, there's a lot of interest and hopefully a lot of help in this audience, too. I hope you enjoyed today's forum. We encourage you to continue conversation with cookies in the back of the room. You can also view and share today's forum in all of our forums on CTV, Columbus Television, on WOSU, and PBS affiliates, through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Let's thank our sponsors, Huckleberry House, Star House, and Community Shelter Board. And before we thank our speakers once more, I just want to remind you, this is a great deal. You know, buy 1 pound of Star House Special Blend #1, and $10 goes to Star House. So please, yes, and it's good coffee, and I love coffee, so I'm buying some, so you should too. Okay, thanks our speakers also, Ann Bischoff, Tom Albanese, Becky Westerfeld, and Dan Sharp. Thank you. Thank you.